The Competition Tribunal hearing the ongoing case against SA Airlink, where the airline is actually accused of engaging in predatory as well as excessive pricing on the Johannesburg-Mthatha route between 2012 and 2016, has adjourned to Monday. The Competition Commission alleges that Airlink reduced fares to unsustainably low levels in order to eliminate rival airline Fly Blue Crane, and then raise prices significantly once again after the competitor had exited. Now, the Commission argues this conduct actually harmed consumers and also discouraged market entry, with estimated consumer losses up to 108 million rand over the period. Now, the case is seen as a landmark test for South Africa's competition laws on thin, high-barrier regional routes, with broad implications for airline pricing as well as consumer access at large. All right, let's further expand on this by welcoming aviation expert Dr. Guy Leitch. Dr. Leitch, it's a pleasure to have you with us on the show, so welcome. So firstly, maybe just for public interest, in layman terms as well, do airlines individually set in South Africa their flight costs? And what study or research then do they determine the final price that consumers actually pay? Surely consumer protection bodies should be part and parcel of these considerations, or am I completely wrong, Doctor?
Yeah, hi, good afternoon, and nice to be with you and your viewers. Well, the airline industry in South Africa is completely deregulated, and it's been so since, well, the early 1990s, which means it's a complete free-for-all, and that means we have what is most commonly called the dynamic pricing model. So in the bad old days, before airline seats were deregulated, it was like going to the movie. You bought a ticket and everyone paid the same price for the same seats. After deregulation, we had this dynamic pricing model, which means that the airlines can essentially charge as much as they possibly can for their seats, which makes the timing of when you buy the seat really important. Normally, as a rule, if you buy it really early, it's going to be cheaper than if you buy it at the last minute, when it might be the last or 2 or 3 seats that are available on the flight. So that's the position we find ourselves in South Africa, and it's why the airline industry has been subject to so much scrutiny by the Competition and Commission, and indeed the Competition Tribunal, when matters get that far. We've seen problems with SAA and Comair and Nationwide and Comair being awarded over R1 billion in damages against SAA for also, in a sense, abuse of the free market. So this is not a new problem.
Guy, very interesting. We're going to get to, of course, those regulatory issues further on in the interview. But maybe for better understanding and clarity as well, let's further unpack the conundrum then when a new airliner, right, enters the market. What type of costs would they have to look at in order to operate versus an incumbent airlines, as we've seen in this case, their expenses? Now, these certainly cannot be approached in the same manner, as they vary quite differently. And can we then safely say that SA Airlink is then maybe guilty of confusing their manner of approach within this regard? I mean, we have seen, of course, the airlines launching with ridiculously low prices just to get the customers familiar with the brand, and gradually introducing competitive market price plans as, of course, cement their positions within the industry.
Well, that's the real challenge the Competition Tribunal faces, because all airlines have special offers. I mean, FlySafair, which is now the dominant domestic carrier in South Africa, is well known for its very special offers, and even there's currently a special offer running right now. So on the one hand, how does the Competition Tribunal decide whether this is just a free market and they're trying to build up the route and sell extra seats, or on the other hand, whether it's predatory pricing and they're trying to keep the competitor out of the market? And that is obviously what this complaint against FlySafair is all about. It goes back as far as afield as 2013, when Cesar Mzimela, who was a former CEO of both SA Express and, in fact, SAA, and she was a successful CEO of SAA. In fact, the airline made a profit in 2010 under her leadership. But she launched an airline, or attempted to launch an airline called Fly Blue Crane. And that was going to operate on these very thinly served routes like Mafeking and Mthatha. But in fact, it never got off the ground, and hence her complaint that predatory pricing was put in place to effectively keep them out of the market.
Now, also, why then, Doctor, would a specific route cost, specifically higher fares than others, that are actually quite busy? Let's talk, for example, I'm glad you've just mentioned the issue of routes just now, because I remember about the Polokwane route where there has been a single to and return flight in a single day due to, of course, the less busy nature of the flight requests, I suppose. But when making such a determination, the Competition Commission should have been there right from the start, providing guidelines of competition assessment to the entity while also forcing fair market practice as well as compliance. If we look at this case, this is already a 2018 investigation, Doctor, that they are now responding to. How will those overcharged customers even be reimbursed should there be such a ruling in the matter?
Well, as I said earlier, in fact, it's an incredibly difficult matter to try and assess, and it's, as you say, it's a landmark case in that it's still banging away through the Competition Tribunal hearings, that they're trying to get to the bottom of this one. Because it's very difficult to determine what is a fair price that an airline must charge. You cannot compare it to, for instance, a flight between Joburg and Durban or Cape Town with FlySafair, because FlySafair or for that matter, Lift or even SAA operate much bigger aircraft on these routes, whereas the Mthatha route from Joburg has to be operated with very small 35-seater aircraft. And one of the reasons for that is because we've all heard of the problems with AXA and the approval of their flight procedures. Well, Mthatha Airport hasn't been recently surveyed, so the airport is not approved for any aircraft bigger than 35 seats. And that makes it incredibly expensive to operate, because now you've still got two pilots, you've got the movement, you've got the whole aircraft to operate, but across only 35 seats compared to the 183 seats of a Boeing 737 as operated by FlySafair. So the costs are obviously enormously higher indeed. And let me point out, though, that Airlink has done an enormously important job in providing essential air connectivity to Mthatha. In fact, they're providing as many as 4 or 5 flights a day, perhaps because the aircraft that they use have to be so small because of the problems with AXA. But the value of these flights cannot be underestimated. If Airlink didn't operate to Mthatha and there wasn't another airline to step in the gap, let's say Semair, who's a competitor of Airlink's, didn't step into the gap, well, then Mthatha would gradually and slowly decay or decline, simply because the essential connectivity that brings investment and people and so on wouldn't come. East London is almost 200 kilometers away from Mthatha. So it's absolutely essential that an airline be able to operate the service. And I would go so far as to say, almost regardless of cost in this particular case.
Doctor, we unfortunately out of time. I would have liked to engage you further on those conversations about why are we not re-engaging on the re-regulation of the industry as a whole, because I understand the NCC, the National Consumer Commission, is currently the only body investigating issues that are related to pricing and overbooking of these flights. But Doctor, nonetheless, thank you so much for your input this afternoon. That is aviation expert Dr. Guy Leitch there on the Competition Tribunal's case on overpricing of flights by SA Airlink.